The strangest old photographs are not the ones showing ruins. They are the ones showing marble libraries, domed courthouses, and palace-like railway stations standing behind muddy roads, wooden sidewalks, and horse carts, as if the city had built its monuments before it had finished building itself. I kept returning to that contradiction because it appeared far beyond famous capitals. Beginning in 1881, Andrew Carnegie and the institutions associated with his philanthropy funded 2,509 public libraries worldwide, including nearly 1,700 in the United States. At the same time, banks, museums, post offices, universities, and railway companies across Britain, France, Canada, and the United States adopted the same columns, domes, symmetry, sculpture, and monumental stairs. The official explanation is strong: industrial wealth, railway distribution, professional architects, classical revival design, public funding, and a shared desire for stability and authority. On the surface, that makes sense, but the photographs still create an unease the documents do not erase. Temporary-looking streets lead toward buildings designed to survive for centuries. Smoke hangs over temples of knowledge. Ordinary commuters enter stations built like imperial halls. Nothing here proves an erased civilization. But if so many growing cities once believed ordinary people deserved public buildings that felt eternal, what changed? And why does the older world sometimes appear more confident in the future than we do? Look closely at one documented photograph from the years between roughly 1850 and 1930. A monumental civic building rises at the end of an unfinished street. Its facade is balanced and complete. Stone steps lift the entrance above the mud. Above them, a pediment or dome gives the institution the outline of something ancient, and in front of it, the city looks temporary. Horse carts cut dark tracks into the road. Wooden sidewalks run beside rough lots. Smoke drifts through the frame. Smaller structures appear improvised beside a building created to look immovable. The word impossible does not describe the engineering. The construction methods are often documented. The architects are known. The materials can be counted. The money can be traced. The impossibility is visual. It is the feeling that two different ideas of civilization occupy the same photograph. One is hurried, industrial, dirty, and expanding. The other is formal, symmetrical, ceremonial, almost timeless. We are often taught to imagine the 19th-century city as a rough stage on the way toward modernity, crowded, smoky, technically limited, still waiting for paved roads, electric systems, and mature infrastructure. Yet these same cities placed enormous labor into domes, marble facades, vaulted ceilings, sculpture, and staircases wide enough for public ceremony. They did not wait until everything else was finished. They built monuments inside unfinished worlds. Every old city is rhetorical framing for a widespread pattern, not a literal claim. Across Britain, France, Canada, the United States, and other European cities shaped by classical revival and Beaux-Arts traditions, a shared vocabulary became unmistakable. Railway stations, libraries, banks, courthouses, museums, universities, post offices, capitol buildings, and civic centers used a recurring language of formal entrances, ordered facades, domes, sculpture, and broad stairs. The resemblance was clear. A courthouse suggested order. A bank suggested stability. A university, arranged around a monumental axis, suggested inherited knowledge. A public library approached by broad steps suggested that reading was a civic act. The records explain why these forms spread through architectural education, publications, exhibitions, professional networks, public finance, philanthropy, and rail transport. But the stairs matter more than they seem. They separate the institution from the mud without hiding the mud. They turn entry into ascent. The building was not waiting for the city to become complete. It was giving the unfinished city a finished image of itself. In 1851, London revealed one of the clearest expressions of that confidence. Joseph Paxton's Crystal Palace was created for the Great Exhibition in Hyde Park. It was an enormous structure of iron, glass, and timber assembled from standardized and prefabricated components. Repeating iron frames supported immense walls of glass. Industrial production created a building whose scale could feel almost unreal, yet its construction belonged completely to the technology and organization of its time. The building did not imitate a stone temple, it displayed modern engineering openly. Then the exhibition closed. The original Crystal Palace was dismantled, and its prefabricated components were used to construct a larger version at Sydenham. The reconstructed building contained approximately 4,000 tons of iron and 400 tons of glass. That fact matters, because it changes the nature of the mystery. The same century associated with muddy streets and horse transport could standardize components, coordinate material on a monumental scale, move iron and glass through expanding transport networks, and assemble architecture that resembled a transparent cathedral of industry. Modern industry could create wonder, but it could also hide inside forms that appeared ancient. Consider the present dome of the United States Capitol in Washington, D.C. It was constructed between 1856 and 1866. Beneath its classical profile are 8,909,200 pounds of cast iron girders, plates, columns, and ornaments. The pieces were raised into position with steam-powered derricks. Here, the contradiction becomes physical. Industrial technology did not replace classical symbolism. It entered inside it. Steam lifted iron into the shape of a dome, associated with older civic traditions. Mass-produced metal became the skeleton of a national monument designed to appear permanent, balanced, and historically rooted. A dome is not merely a roof. It is a statement about what a society places above itself. The designers were not confused about the age in which they lived. They were surrounded by factories, machinery, rail transport, smoke, and rapid urban growth. They understood modern construction systems, yet they repeatedly placed those systems beneath forms inherited from Greek, Roman, Renaissance, and Baroque traditions. A new material could provide strength, but it could not provide meaning by itself. Iron could carry the dome. Steam could lift it. Engineering could calculate it. But the final shape still had to tell the public what the building represented. The dome said continuity. The columns said order. The ceremonial approach suggested that government was larger than the individual office holder and older than the present moment. The Crystal Palace and the Capitol Dome appear almost opposed. One exposed its industrial framework beneath glass. The other concealed industrial structure inside a classical silhouette. One celebrated the machine. The other used the machine to construct an image of eternity. Together, they reveal the machinery behind the monument: standardized production, coordinated labor, railway distribution, steam-powered lifting, and confidence in scale. The records explain the structure. The photograph preserves the contradiction. The old buildings are not mysterious because the people in them lacked technology. They are mysterious because they reveal what that technology was being asked to serve. That question became visible on the scale of an entire city in Chicago in 1893. The World's Columbian Exposition became known as the White City. Its planned avenues, lagoons, coordinated neoclassical facades, formal spaces, and electric illumination presented modern industrial civilization through the visual language of an ordered classical world. It was a deliberately designed exhibition environment, and many of its grand structures were temporary. Their unity depended on composition, lighting, water, movement, and the controlled relationship between buildings. Yet the temporary city projected permanence. Visitors encountered modern systems beneath an image of civic harmony. Electric light illuminated facades that recalled older architectural traditions. Industrial capability appeared not as noise or disorder, but as an organized public dream. The strange part was not the cost. It was what the grandeur was built to prove. The White City proposed that modernization did not have to mean ugliness. It suggested that new technology, mass movement, landscape, spectacle, and monumental architecture could be coordinated into a unified civic experience. Outside the exhibition, Chicago remained commercial, smoky, unequal, crowded, and unfinished. Inside, modern life was arranged into symmetry. The contrast resembles the old photograph of the monumental building beside the muddy road. In both cases, the ceremonial city appears before the ordinary city has caught up. Perhaps this was not hypocrisy. Perhaps it was aspiration. A city did not build a grand courthouse because every street was already ordered. It built the courthouse because it wanted order to become visible. A town did not construct a formal library because every citizen already possessed education. It constructed the library because knowledge was being announced as a public value. The white city's influence extended beyond the fair. Its architecture and planning helped shape later American design and contributed to the ideas associated with the City Beautiful movement. Supporters of that movement promoted formal civic centers, green areas, axial planning, grand public spaces, and Beaux-Arts design. They believed that carefully ordered surroundings could strengthen civic identity, morale, and social order. Architecture was not treated as decoration added after practical needs had been met. It was understood as an instrument of public life. That belief explains why a temporary exhibition could matter long after its buildings vanished. The White City was less a finished city than a persuasive image of one. It gave industrial modernity a face it wanted the public to remember. Temporary walls, permanent ambition, and then the pattern moved beyond the Capitol, the university, and the International Exposition. It entered ordinary communities, beginning with the library at Dunfermline, Scotland, in 1881. Andrew Carnegie and the institutions associated with his philanthropy funded 2,509 public libraries worldwide. Nearly 1,700 were constructed in the United States. The final building grants were issued in 1917. The numbers are large, but the deeper change happened at street level. The program carried dignified public architecture beyond famous capitals and into industrial towns and smaller communities. A library could become more than a room containing books. It could become a visible threshold between the local street and the accumulated knowledge of the wider world. Regional materials, budgets, architects, and local traditions shaped the buildings differently. Yet the recurring ambition is difficult to miss. A public entrance, a formal facade, steps lifting the visitor from street level, windows opening reading rooms to daylight, an exterior that told even the person who never entered that knowledge had a permanent address in the city. The roads often look provisional. The institution does not. That contrast changes the meaning of monumentality. Grandeur was not reserved only for royal palaces, national capitals, or wealthy private houses. In community after community, it was attached to a function ordinary people could use. The strange part was not simply that libraries cost money. It was who the dignity was built for. A worker could climb the stairs. A child could enter beneath the formal facade. A person without a private collection could sit in a daylight-filled room and use books maintained as a public resource. The architecture framed that access as important, but the stairs matter in another way. They do not merely raise the floor above the street. They slow the approach. They make entry visible. They turn a routine visit into a small civic ceremony. The library stood above the temporary condition of the road because the value it represented was meant to outlast that condition. This is why the program belongs at the center of the mystery. It shows that monumental public architecture was not only a language of centralized power, it could also be a language of aspiration distributed across thousands of communities. A permanent facade could announce a future the town had not yet fully achieved. The building was not proof that the city was complete. It was a promise that knowledge would remain while the city continued becoming. By the early 20th century, the language of monumentality had spread across an international network of public functions. Railway stations gave movement a civic stage. Libraries gave knowledge the architecture of permanence. Universities arranged education around formal axes. Museums and courthouses used ceremonial space to separate public institutions from the speed and disorder of the street. The function was ordinary. The architecture was not. In New York, that belief took monumental form on Fifth Avenue. The main building of the New York Public Library, now known as the Stephen A. Schwarzman Building, was dedicated in 1911 after 16 years of design and construction. At the time it opened, it was the largest marble building constructed in the United States. 16 years. That period of development reveals something a finished facade can hide. Monumental architecture was not ordered into existence by a single gesture. It required planning, finance, design, engineering, material, labor, and institutional patience. The building turned knowledge into physical weight. Marble walls gave the library durability. Grand reading spaces gave study a sense of ceremony. The visitor did not merely receive access to books. The visitor entered a civic environment in which knowledge had been placed near the center of public identity. What kind of society believes a public reading room deserves monumental scale? A similar idea shaped Columbia University's Low Memorial Library. Influenced by the Pantheon in Rome, it became the visual and academic center of a Beaux-Arts campus plan. The example is concise, but its message is clear. The dome was not simply placed over a room. It organized the campus symbolically. Paths and sightlines directed movement toward knowledge as destination, inheritance, and authority. The old world was not merely copying the past. It was assigning old forms to new institutions. The courthouse borrowed the authority of antiquity. The bank borrowed its permanence. The museum borrowed its sacred distance. The university borrowed its intellectual lineage. The library borrowed its dignity. And the railway terminal borrowed ceremonial scale. On February 2nd, 1913, Grand Central Terminal officially opened to the public in New York. More than 150,000 people reportedly visited on its opening day. They were not entering a palace in the political sense. They were entering a transportation system. Why did a railway terminal need to resemble a civic palace? Because arrival and departure had become central rituals of the industrial city. The terminal placed the individual traveler inside a larger order of schedules, routes, destinations, and collective movement. A commuter could cross a hall built with the emotional force of a monument. Transportation could be efficient and ceremonial at the same time. Familiarity reduces buildings to their functions: a library to books, a terminal to trains, a university to rooms on a campus map. But their architecture argued for more. Broad stairs slowed the approach. A dome directed the eye upward. Symmetry suggested intelligibility. A long axis created orientation. A monumental hall reduced the individual in scale while still inviting that individual inside. The building said, "You are part of something larger, and that larger thing has prepared a place for you." These institutions did not merely serve the public. They staged the public, suggesting that ordinary civic life possessed dignity. The documented historical explanation is strong. Industrial wealth financed construction. Railways moved stone, iron, glass, timber, decorative components, and workers. Professional architects shared methods through schools, publications, competitions, and international exhibitions. Municipal governments, national institutions, universities, banks, and philanthropists wanted buildings that communicated authority. That explanation accounts for the mechanism. It does not completely settle the question of priority. Why did societies with unfinished roads give finished symbolic form to institutions? Why did cities surrounded by smoke invest in marble? Why did practical functions receive domes, halls, sculpture, and ceremonial approaches? The stronger question is not who secretly built the old civic world. It is why modern societies, despite possessing far greater technical power, often became less willing to build for the same emotional purpose. Modern civilization did not forget steel, glass, engineering, prefabrication, transport, or mass production. In many ways, those capacities expanded beyond anything the 19th century possessed. What changed was often the symbolic assignment. Public buildings increasingly competed with speed, cost, flexible use, commercial value, short construction cycles, branding, and the expectation that structures might be altered, converted, or replaced rather than inherited. This does not mean every older building was beautiful or every modern building is disposable. Monumental architecture could serve hierarchy, political authority, exclusion, and control as easily as dignity or public morale. Marble walls did not guarantee justice, and domes did not guarantee wisdom. But the contrast remains. Many older institutions wanted to appear as if they would outlive everyone who entered them. Many modern environments are designed around the possibility of adaptation, expansion, rebranding, or replacement. The strange part is not that one age used stone and another uses glass. The strange part is the change in emotional horizon. A Carnegie library announced that books deserved a permanent civic address. The New York Public Library announced that public knowledge could occupy one of the largest marble buildings in the nation. Grand Central announced that the daily traveler could move through a hall of ceremony. The White City announced that industrial modernity could be ordered into beauty. The Capitol Dome announced that new machinery could carry an ancient symbol. The Crystal Palace announced that modern engineering could itself become spectacle. Different structures, different functions, one recurring expectation. Industry was asked to produce more than utility. The official explanation can account for construction methods, materials, architects, funding, professional networks, and stylistic transmission. But it does not completely remove the emotional contradiction visible in the photographs. The city seems uncertain about the present and completely certain about the future. Perhaps the deepest difference is not technical ability, but cultural patience. A 16-year library project assumes continuity. A marble facade assumes maintenance. A ceremonial hall assumes that public life will remain important enough for future generations to inherit the space. Such buildings place a wager on people who have not yet been born. That wager can be arrogant. It can also be generous. Older societies placed their aspirations into visible form. They made ideals heavy. They gave authority a facade, knowledge a staircase, movement a hall, and civic order an axis through the city. Our own aspirations may be no less intense, but they are often less permanent, less public, and less physically shared. The old buildings feel impossible because their confidence has become unfamiliar. Return once more to the archival photograph. A monumental building stands complete while the world around it is still becoming. The road is dark with mud. A horse cart passes beneath a stone facade. Wooden sidewalks trace the edges of an unfinished street. Smoke softens the distance. The city appears temporary, but the institution at its center does not. The photograph compresses 2 times into one frame. The street belongs to urgency. The building belongs to inheritance. Now, the contradiction looks different. Crystal Palace shows that standardized iron, glass, timber, prefabrication, and industrial coordination could create monumental wonder in 1851. The Capitol Dome shows that steam-powered derricks could raise 8,909,200 pounds of cast iron between 1856 and 1866 and shape industrial structure into an ancient civic silhouette. The White City shows that temporary facades, lagoons, formal planning, and electric illumination could project permanence in 1893. Carnegie libraries show that the language of dignity could move into thousands of communities from 1881 until the final grants in 1917. The New York Public Library shows what 16 years of institutional patience could give to public knowledge in 1911. Low Memorial Library shows how education could be placed at the symbolic center of a campus. Grand Central shows how ordinary transportation could become civic ceremony in 1913, before more than 150,000 reported opening day visitors. The pattern is a shared belief translated through different cities, institutions, materials, and national traditions. Important public functions should look important. That belief gave permanence a visible form. Perhaps this is what was actually lost. Not construction technology, not the ability to lift iron, cut stone, assemble glass, or coordinate labor. A confidence that public space could shape the inner life of the citizen. A belief that ordinary people should encounter beauty, seriousness, memory, and scale in places they did not privately own. The buildings were expected to do more than shelter books, offices, classrooms, courts, or trains. They were expected to influence behavior, orient attention, and place daily life inside a longer story. The roads could remain unfinished because the institution represented something beyond the road. The same architecture could intimidate, exclude, glorify authority, and conceal inequality. Its symbolic ambition is still difficult to deny. The older structure remains, but the expectation behind it becomes harder to recover. A marble library still holds books. A terminal still moves travelers. A dome still crowns a government building. We pass through spaces built to influence the citizen and notice only the function they perform. The records tell us who designed many of these buildings. They tell us how iron was lifted, how glass was assembled, how marble was installed, how institutions were funded, and how architectural styles crossed borders. What they cannot fully preserve is the emotional agreement that made such projects seem necessary. Why should a railway hall inspire awe? Why should a public library appear permanent enough to survive generations? Why should a courthouse, museum, university, or post office contribute to the identity of an entire city? Why should ordinary citizens be surrounded by beauty in places they do not privately own? The old photographs do not answer. They only hold the contradiction still. Mud in the foreground, stone in the distance, a temporary street leading toward an eternal facade. Maybe the buildings were never impossible. Maybe what seems impossible now is the level of conviction required to build them. And perhaps the most unsettling possibility is not that an earlier civilization vanished without explanation. It is that the civilization is documented. Its machines are known. Its money is traceable. Its architectural schools, public programs, exhibitions, transport systems, and construction methods remain part of the record. What disappeared was not the evidence. What may have disappeared was the belief that the public world should feel larger than private life. So, when we stand beneath the dome, cross the marble hall, climb the ceremonial staircase, or look into the old photograph, the question is not only what happened to those buildings. The question is what happened to the people who once believed they were necessary. And if a civilization can lose that belief without noticing the moment it disappears, what else might be vanishing from our own world while the streets still look complete?